Okay, so I'll start by correcting one thing. I'm not one of the co-founders of Paxful. I'm actually the head of product marketing. We were going to have Ray here today, but I decided to take his place and talk you through a very short version about what would be some of the main true use cases of Bitcoin. In my job, doing product marketing, I basically get my hands dirty every day. I get into the product, I start talking to the users, who they are, what they're doing, and how this actually is working around in the real ecosystem. So, how did we get to where we're at today? First of all, I guess I would say there's like three main miracles that brought us to where we are. These could be described in three different things. There's peer-to-peer cash. We all know what that is. The original white paper, Satoshi Nakamoto, digital currency, being able to transact free of any block and so on. Then we move on to the human layer. And most of us who would maybe call ourselves Bitcoin maximalists or evangelists are probably a lot of us here in the room today. I'm pretty sure most of us would say that we've introduced someone to Bitcoin. We've taught them how to use it. We've showed them how to set up a wallet. We've basically spread the word. And this is like one of these key miracles that brought us to where we are today, because people start to believe in Bitcoin. They understand what it is. They understand how it can break down barriers, borders. And then we move on to the third miracle, which is the sharing economy. So starting maybe back in Craigslist 1995, you had people who were basically setting up peer-to-peer shops, selling goods on the internet, whether it was like a room they had for rent or whether it was a car they had for sale. Basically, we started connecting together people to people through internet services. Then we moved on to things like Airbnb and Uber. So I mean, who maybe 15 years ago would think that they would be renting out the spare room in their house to some guy from Cambodia? It just wouldn't be something you'd think of. But these platforms came along. They sort of built in trust into systems. And basically now you are more than happy to jump into a car with a random guy outside and you won't think twice about it. Moving on then, we're now to basically putting skills onto the internet. So we have platforms like Udemy where anyone can be a teacher, anyone can basically share their knowledge. You don't have to have 10,000 in the bank account to get an education. It's all there for everyone who needs it. And now moving into 2015, what we're seeing is basically finance, where you can borrow someone's bank account, you can have someone pay a bill for you on the other side of the world. And most of this has been done through Bitcoin and blockchain. So why am I here? Who am I? And what is Paxful? Basically, Paxful is, to put it in the shortest terms possible, a universal translator of money. So you can be a guy who doesn't have a bank account. You can go down to the store. You can buy a $1,000 Amazon gift card. You can bring that to a guy on Paxful. Maybe he'll give you $800 worth of Bitcoin for it. He's happy. He's getting what he wants. You're happy. You now have this form of money where you can make a payment anywhere in the world. So to keep it very short, we have more than 300 different payment methods that can go in. You can basically, after you, let's say, buy a gift card or you pay someone a deposit, what you get is Bitcoin. And we would consider Bitcoin as this universal clearing layer that works on Paxful. So once you have the Bitcoin, you can then take that money out in a form of value, whether it's money to your PayPal account in the UK, or maybe it's cash to your cousin in Cambodia. But you can basically send that money from Paxful, from Bitcoin, to any one of these other 300 payment methods. So, moving on to the actual use cases of Bitcoin. More or less through using the product, we've identified 7 key cases. Depending where you are in the world, some of them will be more relevant than others. Here in Western world, I guess you could say the 2 main ones we see are gray markets and speculation. So it was only last night I actually learned, when doing some research for this, that actually the very first internet transaction was a $25 weed purchase or something like this that was done over DARPA. Some students were talking from New York to whatever, and they agreed they'd hook up and they made a deal in cash. So it's not that surprising that gray markets and gray area was one of the first use cases of Bitcoin. And what we had there was we had Silk Road, which was like very much in the gray territory. And then as things kind of progress, they get, shades and shades lighter, like gambling, for example. Like it's very hard to accept payments if you run an online casino. Or even into more like, let's say, safe things. Like if you want to open a vaporizer store in the US, you can't get a Visa or MasterCard merchant account. So these became like the first use cases for Bitcoin because it became this like tool that could allow them access to the financial system. And then unfortunately there is speculation as well. And even more regrettably, I think probably about 90% of what's going on in the space right now is here. And it's a bit of a toxic waste ground, but it is unfortunately a real use case. And I hope as the others develop more and more that this will become less dominant in the Bitcoin sense. So, moving on, we can say payments. Now, while speculation and maybe dark gray uses are more common in the Western world, I just recently came back from a tour we did in Africa where we were basically teaching students there and we were doing like campus tours and educating people how to use cryptocurrency. And one of the things we learned is that people in Africa have real troubles paying for goods. Like Africa is a very big, let's say, merchant economy. Everywhere you go, there's guys have their own little stores on the streets. What they're not is a big manufacturing economy. So usually these guys will source their goods somewhere in China. But how do they make the payment? I mean, a lot of people are unbanked. They don't have a bank account. And quite often what they actually do is they rely on people or friends or connections somewhere else in the world that will make a payment for them. This is kind of one of the oldest forms of money. It's like peer-to-peer finance. I believe in the Hindu world it's called hawala, or there's like, it's basically using a friend to pay a bill, using your connections, your financial connections around the world to basically connect you to the system. So what can happen here is that if you have a store and you want to buy your goods from China or you want to import something from Asia, it's very, very hard to get money out of Africa. In some countries where they have monetary controls, you're limited to maybe spending $100 in foreign exchange a month. So if you run a business or anything that requires you importing goods, this is like ultimately crippling to you. So this has been one of the major use cases we've seen, and this has been like much more evident in like Africa and developing parts of the world where they actually need something to connect them to the financial system, and they don't have the options we have here in the West. The second one again is e-commerce. It's not so much a thing here as well, but while I was in Kenya, in Nairobi, I met a lady who was there in the crowd, and she has like a store where she sells clothing that she makes to people in US, in Europe, and so on. And like I asked her, like when I seen her shop, like how do you receive money? How do you take payments? Like do you wait 3 months for PayPal to say it's okay to take your money out of your account? It's like, no, I can't even get a PayPal account. But so yeah, I asked her then, okay, so how do you actually accept money for these goods you're selling? It's like, well, you know, I had a guy who was a friend of mine. He's from the same town as me, and he lives in New York. So someone wants to buy something from me, I send him his payment details. And because he's from the same town as me in Africa, here in Nairobi, he also has a M-Pesa account. So I give his bank account to the people who want to buy from me. He gets the money, he sends me an email saying, yeah, they paid, and then he settles up with me by an M-Pesa payment. So it's not the most functional system yet, but this is like how Bitcoin has been used right now in these parts of the world. And then moving on to one of the other main ones, which is wealth preservation. Of course, this might not be something we're super in need of here, where we have stable currencies or more or less stable until they start printing more and more of it. But let's say right now in Turkey, political instability, your country isn't starting a war, you're not starting a war, but suddenly your money might be worth 10% less, 20% less another day. So for people that are basically caught in this situation where for no fault of their own, their money suddenly can become worth less, Bitcoin is actually a very stable form of value. Even in these years where you might see it's down 30%, it still means nothing if like a few years ago in Russia, ruble was down 50%. And another one, of course, is remittance. And like when I first heard about Bitcoin back in 2013, 2014, everyone was like, yes, this is like the killer app of Bitcoin. This is going to be the Western Union Slayer, this like key use case that's going to take Bitcoin into the mainstream. But unfortunately, this was a bit of a flop. And one thing I guess that people, maybe in Bitcoin maximalists, sort of fail to understand themselves is that, like, what makes Western Union great? And what makes them great is that they basically have this network of cash outlets everywhere in the world, in every city. And it's very easy for those who are not so tech literate to just go and to find a place to pick up cash without having to understand how Bitcoin works, how the blockchain works, how they can cash out, how they can buy beans and rice with this BTC. It's just too much. And this is like something that we didn't consider at the time, but what we have learned, and like one of the reasons that we're really pushing forward on this is that people will learn to make their own routes and their own remittance routes, and especially, as I've seen and observed and like learned, is that what we're trying to do, especially in Paxful now, is mobilize and weaponize diasporas. So if you have like Indian person who's living in Europe, they might have connections in both, and India, they have their own bank account, in Europe they have a bank account. I guess some of you guys probably know this, but it's like recently been made sort of illegal for businesses to transact or to have, I think, accounts that would be buying and selling Bitcoin. But it's still very much legal for individuals to transact or to basically send Bitcoin to one or each other or to own or to buy Bitcoin. So if you're one of these lucky people who, I don't know, maybe someone in this room who has a bank account in India right now, you can basically sell your Bitcoin on Paxful for 10% above market rates. And this is like one of the oldest businesses in the world, arbitrage. So when you combine remittance with arbitrage and you have a monetary reason for someone to basically send money through Bitcoin because they will get more out at the other side, then this becomes a real use case. So right now, the same guy, he can sell Bitcoin for Indian rupees for 10% more. He can then send that money to his mom or whoever it might be that he wants to send money to. And then he can get money back in his European bank account and he can buy Bitcoin for market price, sell it again for 10% more in India, complete his remittance. And this is basically an incentivized reason to use Bitcoin for this purpose. And the final one, which we have identified, is social good. And what we were doing when we were in Africa is we've been doing this Built with Bitcoin initiative. We hope to build 100 schools across Africa and across the developing world. We've built the second school. We're now looking to build the third one in Kenya. And what we've learned through doing this was that, like, this is actually a true use case for Bitcoin because it's very hard to send money to a usable place in Nairobi where you can use it. Or when we were in Rwanda, for example, there's basically no banking system. So what we did, we took $250,000 of Bitcoin. We looked up on Pax. We said, okay, we have these guys in Nairobi who are accepting Bitcoin. We gave them the Bitcoin. They were more than happy to get Bitcoin at market rates because normally you're paying +5%, +7% in these countries. And then what they did was they cashed us out in local currency and we were able to go buy the tools, buy the resources we needed, and basically build these schools in that country. The only downside of this is that if you're going to do charity through Bitcoin, it's not tax deductible. So you don't have this paper trail if you want to basically save some money that way. But in terms of getting money into a country and trying to actually even get more for it than you would here, it's a very, very, very useful use case. And this is something we hope to continue for the next years. We have a goal to build 100 schools across Africa. Part of this will be teaching the real use cases that I've taught today, educate these people, and hopefully continue to build this ecosystem as it's going along. So for those of us who think maybe this is 2019, the room isn't that busy, it's not that bad. What you're looking at here is not the chart of Bitcoin, although it looks incredibly similar right now. This is actually the chart of Amazon stock. So if you consider the big picture here, we're okay. So that more or less covers very briefly what I wanted to talk about. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to move on. But thanks very much, guys. I hope to see some of you later, and I'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you.